So it will be a tips and tricks that will going to help you out in preparing for the exam, as well as to know what is in this course and how you can achieve the task when you are working in a production environment. The way we will going to cover this, Microsoft has given us official curriculum. Hope you all have gone through the content provided by Microsoft. So I won't be able to go in that deep, but yes, I will try to cover as much as I can. And I will be guiding you that what are the ways by which you can take an exam. So as you can see on my screen that I am on AZ-203-1. Basically, this whole course is divided into 6 modules, and each module is composed of subtopics. I'm just taking you to one of the window that I have on my desktop. You can see that here. If I go to this, right, AZ content. So I have like roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 folders are there, and each folder is one of the book, right? That we're going to cover, that we have to cover in this 8-hour session or 4 hours session today and 4 hours tomorrow. Now, in this, there is a PowerPoint presentations, which I have opened the first one. We will going to cover the slides, as well as I will try to show you the demonstrations wherever applicable, if time permits. Now, before we go into it, let's see that what Microsoft says about this course. So I have opened one of the browser, and I have opened the link that is provided by Microsoft related to that exam. That is exam AZ-203, Developing Solutions for Microsoft Azure. They have actually launched a new version of it, that is AZ-204, but still you can take that 203 because 204 is in beta. Now, if you scroll down, you can see that skill majored. From this whole curriculum, you will be able to see that develop Azure Infrastructure as a Service Compute Solutions, develop Azure Platform as a Service Compute Solutions. What about storage? That is develop for Azure Storage, implement Azure Security, monitor, troubleshoot, and optimize solutions, connect to and consume Azure and third-party services. So they have defined that how much percentage of that topic will come in that exam. Exam will be for 1000 marks, and you have to score 70% to clear that. And whatever topics we will going to cover basically are designed by keeping this area in mind. So I'm going to talk about the topics. So the first thing, that is develop Azure Infrastructure as Service Compute Solutions. I will be taking help of my Word document to explain the concept. So as we know that we are moving towards Azure or the cloud platform. So what is a cloud actually? Cloud is a group of services that we can consume over the net with pay-as-you-go model. Instead of investing the money to buy that resources, we are renting those resources from the vendor. We have, like Microsoft as the vendor which is providing these services, and we call it Azure Cloud Platform. The benefit that we will be getting from it is availability, right, consistency, security, and obviously we don't have to invest money. That is called capitalized investment is not there. Only operational investment is there because we are responsible for paying for the resources that we are consuming. So we will be looking on all those factors. So whatever services are there, services it or Azure provides are divided into 3 main categories. One is infrastructure as a service, then PaaS, platform as a service, SaaS, that is software as a service. Now to understand this, we need to know that any cloud platform that we talk about works with a shared responsibility. Now, what is shared responsibility? Shared responsibility means the consumer or the client as well as the provider work in hand to achieve the goal. They are responsible for managing the whole infra that they are working on. But who is responsible for what depends on whether you are working in infrastructure as a service, whether you're working with PaaS or SaaS. Now, Azure says that I am actually working with the resources at hardware level. So I have bought a lot of hardware from where I will provide the resources. I am responsible for all the networking, physical network. I have storage. Now, whatever services it provides basically is going to be consumed by the user. So this is storage. Now, as a user, if I go with the infrastructure as a service, so we can feel like that I want to have my machines over the cloud platform. Instead of buying those machines and keeping it in my on-premises, I am renting it out from the Azure. So in that case, I'm the one who will going to get that machine from Azure. So it is like a virtual machines that we will be working on. So we will have those machines. So here I created a virtual machine which has operating system. Then we are going to work with the security. We can install applications. Virtual network, VPNs, virtual private network we can configure, or virtual network, you can simply say that. And then we can use these applications to design our own softwares, or we can create our applications, custom applications. Now, if we are talking about infrastructure as a service, so in this case, the responsibility of the Azure or the vendor is till here. Azure is responsible for managing the physical hardware, network, and the storage. So Azure is responsible for managing it. But once that machine is created for you with whatever softwares that you have requested, you are responsible for connecting to it and then do any secure patches, updates, right? Backups, failovers, load balancing, and installing other applications and maintaining that. So a consumer is responsible for working with it. So it is a customer's job. But if we talk about a platform as a service, that is the second phase. So it means that if I am a developer and you ask me to develop the website along with maintain the infrastructure for it, I can say it is a bit difficult for me because developer cannot, it's very difficult for a developer to be a good administrator or the infra guy. So they have to think about both the world. So it is a bit difficult for them. So Azure says that you can use some services that falls into platform as a service where we will going to manage the whole infrastructure for you. You don't have to think about infrastructure. You just focus on your website or the software and you deploy it on that infrastructure. When you use that capability, then Azure is responsible for backup, restore, failovers, scaling, everything. You just focus on your website and deploy that. So in that case, the responsibility of Azure is further, right? So Azure is actually working till here. And you as a developer will focus on your web application. So you are designing your web applications in platform as a service. So when you are a customer, you design your website, you apply the logic, how it will connect to the database, what pages it will have, everything, and you deploy it. So in this case, the control of a customer is Very less. So they are losing the control as they are moving from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service. And last but not the least, the software as a service. Now, whatever application the customer has created, right, it is available to the users so that they can work on it. So they will get a URL. They connect to that application, they work on it, but they cannot make any amendment in that web application. So for them, it is just a software which they can consume. If they want any change, they have to talk to the developer for playing with that or for the modifications. But for them, it is just an application which they are consuming it, like Office 365, Gmail, Facebook. So these are the applications which are available to us, which we are consuming it. We have no right to change it. So for that is called software as a service. So as we are moving from top to bottom, we are actually losing the control. So Azure is getting more control when we move from infrastructure to software as a service. But Azure says that it is my responsibility to provide the infra for you, in that case, to manage that infra for you. And you just have to pay for the resources that you're consuming it. So the whole modules, whatever we're going to cover, will be categorized into these categories. So the infrastructure as a service, the best thing that we can work with is virtual machines. So the name called virtual machines, the machines which are virtually available to you, physically they are available on someone's else infrastructure. So you all are aware about the various models that are available, like private cloud, public cloud, and hybrid cloud. So when we are renting the resources from someone else like Azure, so Azure says that the resources that I have is not only for one organization, it is available for all those who have subscribed with me. So in that case, it is a public cloud. Whereas if we talk about an organization, each organization has bought a lot of hardware, softwares, networks, right? They have their manpowers to manage that. And whatever infrastructure that they have configured is only available to the users of that organization. Then we call it platform as a service. Sorry, it is considered as private cloud and the on-premises, you can say that, because only the organization users can consume it, and that whole infrastructure is managed by that organization only. So that is private cloud. If you are new to market and you have new organization and you want to manage the infrastructure, it's better to go with the cloud. But if you are already in the market and you have invested a lot of money in on-premises, so how you will going to migrate to Azure? It is not possible to migrate everything in one go. So you will actually go with hybrid, where you will actually move few more public facing sites or public facing endpoints or resources to Azure, and they still consume the resources which are available in on-premises. So you are taking the benefit of both the world. But in that case, more manpower is required. One who understands how to work with on-premises, another one who is good in cloud platform. So it is more tricky. So you have to think about in what type of scenario you want to work with. And questions will definitely come based on that. Okay, so let me go with the slides. So that is AZ-204, develop Azure infrastructure as a service, compute solutions. In this, we will going to talk about the module 1, implementing solutions that use virtual machines, implement batch jobs by using Azure batch services, and creating containerized solutions. So here we will going to talk about the difference between the virtual machines and the containerized solutions. What is the difference between them? Why we are moving to the containerized solutions? What are the benefits of it? So to work with this, we have the first main slide, which is going to talk about the virtual machines. I'm not going in depth, like I'm just going to tell you that what is the benefit of using it and how we can create it. So initially, if I go with I have a new organization and I want to set up my infrastructure. So what I can do is I have to think about what hardware and resources I need. So I am responsible to work in a traditional approach, like Bear with me for a second, please. So in traditional approach, I'm responsible for hardware, software, licenses for softwares. I am responsible for network, in cable, space, and manpower. So this list will go ahead, endless, and I have to spend a lot of money in buying that resource. But what if I bought some hardware and software, but after some time I realizes that that hardware is not compatible to the need that I'm working with? So in that case, either I have to upgrade my hardware or I have to buy a new hardware. So the old hardware maybe becomes obsolete. So it is a dead investment. And even after configuring it, I have to maintain that. So there is a operational expenditure in it. So to overcome all these situations, we are moving to the cloud platform where we can rent the resources on demand and we can pay for the resources that we are consuming it. So to achieve that goal, we have in infrastructure as a service, we have the concept of virtual machines. Now, why we are what is the benefit of virtual machines? I have this laptop with me with 16 GB RAM and 500 GB of hard disk, and I have installed Windows 10 operating system. Then I might want to run a Linux machine, or I want to run Windows Server operating system. So one thing is I can make it a dual boot, but I can run only one machine at a time. So my client says that no, I want to have 2 or 3 machines running at the same time. So I go with the virtualization concept where I enable the hypervisor support and I created a virtual machines on that main machine. So when we talk about virtual machine, it is sharing the hardware resources of my main machine. So my RAM will going to be consumed by all the virtual machines. So I have to say, okay, out of 6 GB, 3 GB will be used by main operating system, and rest of the resources like RAM is going to be shared by virtual machines. I can allocate them. Hard disk space can also be shared. So I can run all the machines at the same time. So anyone I can set a network so that they can communicate with each other. So they are virtually available. The benefit is that I don't need to buy an extra hardware, right? I don't have to buy an extra space to keep those hardware. So that's what virtual machine. But in that case, I need to have that hardware, means physical main machine, which is compatible with the resources that helps me to run the virtual machine. So horizontal scaling and vertical scaling. So I'm talking about vertical scaling, where in one machine I'm adding more resources, but I am not actually buying extra machines to achieve that goal. So it is a bit expensive, right? So what I can do is I can thought about moving it to Azure, where I can create these virtual machines by renting the resources from Azure. And once these machines are created, I can connect to them remotely with a remote desktop, and I can work with it as if it belongs to me. And when I don't want it, I can destroy them. The benefit is that I can get that machines in few clicks. I don't have to wait for a long time to get that hardware, to install the operating system, and so on. No, within few clicks, I will get my virtual machine, and I am owner of it, so I can manage it as if it is my own machine. So how these machines will work, right? So every machine needs an operating system, some softwares into it, some drivers into it. So the cloud platform like Azure gives you some images. So virtual machines work with images. Whenever you want to create a virtual machine, you will choose one of the existing image that is available from Azure. You can choose the image like I want to have a Windows Server operating system. I want Visual Studio 2019 machine, right, with server operating system. I want a SQL Server machine. I want Linux machine. So I have a lot of images available. And when I choose the image, I can actually specify also the plan, right, where I can specify how much resources my machine needs, like CPU cores, RAM, hardware, like hard disk, and everything. So based on those settings, my virtual machines will be created, and then I'm the owner of it. I can connect to them remotely. Now, this is the whole concept that is defined into the first section. So provisioning virtual machines, create a Microsoft Azure Resource Manager template and configure Azure disk encryption for the VMs. Now, once the virtual machine is created, let's say I created this virtual machine in the development environment and I want to move it to the production environment. Or maybe in the production environment, I have created the machine and I want to create maybe 100 machines exactly like that. So do I have to follow all those settings again and again? Yes, we can do that, but we have a concept of resource manager templates. That is a JSON file. We get the JSON file or that template of the existing virtual machines or the complete resource group, and we can regenerate as many resources as we want based on the template by changing the parameters of it. So it basically helps me to regenerate the same machine or different machine based on the same settings. That is what Azure Resource Manager template is all about. Then we have disk encryption for VMs. So whenever we are working with the virtual machines which has the disks associated with it, and chances are much more higher that if anybody hack my machine, they can easily go with my disk. They can go with the volumes and they can see what is in it. So I want to encrypt them. So Azure give me a facility by which I can encrypt my volumes or the disks completely, so that if anybody wants to work with it, they have to decrypt it. So this is what your first module we're going to talk about, that is provisioning VMs. So whenever you want to create a virtual machine, there are a few things that you need to consider. That what will be the name of the machine that you want to give, on which location your machine should be available, what will be the size of it, pricing model, storage, means every virtual machine that you create has a one disk associated with it where operating system is available, as well as you can attach more disks so that you can add your own custom data into it. Then if you have a virtual machine, it can have a network associated with it so that multiple machines within the same network can communicate with it. We can define my virtual private network, right, in cloud, so that I can decide which resources can communicate with each other. So all these things are very much important when we are configuring the virtual machine. Now, when we talk about location, so region, basically we have few terms that you must be aware about. One is called region. So what is a region? Basically, it is a geographical separated area, right? So when you say geographical separated area, so what does it mean? Basically, all the hardware resources that Azure provides basically are available in the form of data centers. So Azure has various data centers, and data centers are organized or stored in regions so that I can choose my nearest region to host my resources. Geographically separated area. Yeah. Then we have the data center. Data center basically is a group of servers, right, where I can host my resources. And we have a concept of resource group. So these are the three main terms that we should know. So I have regions. It's a region 1, West US, East US, Southeast Asia, and so we have region 2. This is just geographical areas where Microsoft has created their own data centers. So we have a data center 1 and we have data center 2. Similarly, in region 2 also we have the same thing. We have a data centers, data center A and data center B. And each data center has a rack of the servers. So they have racks. So rack 1, you have rack 2, and in each rack, I'm just saying R2. So in each rack, you have servers. Server 1, server 2, and so on. So a lot of servers are there. So whenever I want to create a new resource, let's say I want to create a virtual machine, I want to create an app service, I want to create a SQL database, I can only choose the region. I cannot choose the data center or the server. So whenever I choose the region, it will be deployed on the available server in any of the data center. Now, which region you will choose, that depends upon a lot of factors. The first factor is that the region which is nearer to the clients. Second factor is all about the price. Same service can have different pricing model in different region because the cost of hardware in that region is a bit expensive. As we know that in the cost of hardware and the internet in Africa is much more expensive than in US. So if you host your service in Africa, you have to pay more as compared to if you host that same service in US. So you have to think about where you are hosting it and what is the pricing. Then the policies about the region that, okay, I have some data, I don't want to make it available outside the region 1. So I have to keep all these things in mind. Then only I can choose the appropriate region and my resources will be created in the respected servers on the data centers. Now these regions are almost 300 miles away, so that if one of the region fails, it will not affect the other region. Now, due to any natural calamity, if one of the region fails, all the data centers into it will get corrupted, will destroyed, but I still have another region 1 where my resources can persist. So that is another benefit of regions. We'll talk about it as right. Then we have the concept of resource group. Now, what is a resource group? If I say that I want to have a web application, so I created a website which is created in, let's say, somewhere in East Asia. Then I created another resource called SQL database, which is in West US. And my website is using it. Similarly, I have other resources available. So this website is using that database. Now, after some time, I realizes that I don't need this website, so I deleted it. So how I know that this database is related to it? So I have to find it, right? I should know that this database is related to it and it has no sense to keep it. So I have to delete it manually by finding it. So to avoid all these things, what we do is we go with the resource group, which is a logical container. So we create a resource group. So this resource group is created here. I say resource group 1, which is in some location, let's say West US 2. Now, when I create a website and the database, I say it is going to be created in this resource group. Actually, it is not creating that resource here. It is in the metadata. There is a metadata of that resource group, which says that I have a website which is actually available in East Asia. I have a SQL server. I have a SQL database, which is available in West US. Now, whenever you delete this resource group, it uses this metadata to find all the resources that are in it and it deletes that. So that is a single point of management. That is one of the use of resource group. As well as whenever we work with Azure, we have to have a subscription there. So I'm having a subscription, and then I basically defined multiple users in it, multiple resource group in it, right? So you are creating a resources. in the respective resource group. At last, the bill will be generated at the end of the month to me, and I need to check that which resource is consuming more resources, means for which I have to pay more bills. So at resource group level, I can check that which resource group is generating more bills. So that is for cost management also. So that is the beauty of resource groups. That's why we create the resources in the resource group. So whenever we create a virtual machine, we have to define in which resource group it is available, right? In which location it is, what pricing model, and other settings associated with it. So this is something that they talk about, naming a virtual machine. Though whenever you are creating a virtual machine, you can give any resource, not only virtual machine, whatever resources you want to create, you can give any name to it, unless and until it is not in use. But it should be more meaningful, so that when you look into that name, you should know what this resource is actually holding for you. So there are some rules that you can check here. So rules, you can up to 15 characters for Windows VM and 64 characters for Linux VM. And whenever you are defining the name, it should have information about environment, for which environment you are creating it, location, instance, product or service, and role. Like I want to create a virtual machine for dev environment, so I said dev. In US West, so dev US West, dev US, instances 01, service, it can be a VM, then you can specify in what role it is. So this is just a naming convention. It is not a hard and fast rule, but yes, you can think about it when you are working with it. It is much more beneficial for you guys. Sizing a VM. So whenever it is a virtual machine, it is basically a machine where your resources will run. So it basically works with the compute. So it needs some processing power. It needs some memory, storage. So how to know that how much resources need to be allocated to it? So they have some plans which you can choose, and each plan will decide that how much processing power it will provide, how much memory, how much storage it will going to provide to you. And based on the workload, we can choose that what type of VM we are creating, whether it is for testing, whether it's for production, whether it is memory intensive, whether it is it uses more IOPS. So depending on that, you can choose the plan. So this is just the categories that they're talking about: general purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized, storage optimized. So by keeping all these thing in mind, you can choose the appropriate plan that is associated with it. So if I go to the portal, just to make the things clear, this is my Azure portal. And when I click on create resource, I can choose the Windows Server 2016 data center. That is one of the template that is available. Otherwise, in the compute, we can choose a virtual machine. So whenever you choose a virtual machine, it will going to ask you, okay, these are the basic tabs that you can configure. Not most of the things you can skip if you're not good in it. If I'm a developer, I don't know much about networking, so I can skip that. But yes, I should have an idea about it. The people who are infra guys, they know each and every bit of it. So you can see that whenever you're creating a virtual machine, they're asking you which subscription you're using. Then which resource group. If you don't have, you can choose the existing resource group. If you don't, you can create a resource group on the fly. I can create a new resource group that is called tips and tricks day 1 resource group. Now, instance detail, what name you want to give it for the virtual machine, my VM, where you want to keep it. These are the regions. You can choose one of the region where you want to host your virtual machine. So I can choose East US, availability options. If you have availability set, availability zone, you can configure it. Like if I'm not configuring any availability zone, so single instance will be created, and it is my responsibility to take a backup, failover, load balancing. So I have to do that. Availability options, if I choose availability set, then we'll talk later about it, that how it helps me to overcome from the situation about the backup and restore. Fault tolerance, update domains, we'll talk about it. Image, this is the quite important thing. I say I want to create a virtual machine, but what type of operating system it should have, right? What type of applications it will going to have. So I can simply click browse all public and private images, and it will going to load images, right? You can choose the image that you're interested in. You can choose from here, like I want a SQL server. So it will filter the images. So you can choose the template, whatever you want to have. Free SQL Server license, 19 developer, Ubuntu, SQL Server Enterprise, right? Whatever you feel like. If I need a Visual Studio, so Visual Studio, you can see that. Oh, sorry, my spelling mistake. Visual Studio. So which one? Visual Studio 2017, right? Windows 10 Enterprise, Windows Server. So choose whatever you feel like. Once you have selected that, once you have selected it, then you can specify other things like size. That is the most important thing because the cost will be based on that. When you change the size, you will see the various options available. VM A02, different options, right? So whatever image or the size you will choose, it will going to tell you that how many cores you will going to have, how much RAM you will going to have, how many disks are available to it, right? And the most important thing, the cost per month. So you can choose the one that you want to play with. So I'm just choosing this one and I click select. Then username, because I have to connect it with the remote desktop. So what username I will use? So I can choose this and I can specify the password. Not going to talk much on that because these are the basic things. Now, if you want to connect to it remotely, then what ports should be open? Some inbound and outbound rules you have to specify. So selected port. So by default, RDP is allowed if it is a Linux machine, SSH. If it holds a website and you want to communicate with it, so you can enable the HTTP and HTTPS port. You can configure them after the machine even created. Disks, then it goes to the disk tab. You can specify OS disk, what type of OS disk you want. So I choose standard HDD. Then if you want to create other alternate disks, you can basically create and attach a new disks, existing disks. So you can specify all these settings one by one. Networking, right? Virtual network, subnet, IP addresses. So you can put that into your own virtual network. Once you have defined all these settings, then in the management tag, you want to enable the monitoring on it, right? What type of monitoring you want? Auto shutdown, what is the behavior of it, what you want. All these settings can be configured and then go to advanced tab. Tags basically it's the key value pair. So you can have multiple resources with the same tag and different values. So you can search the resources based on the tag and see the cost involved in it. So a lot of things are there that you can configure. At last, once you are done with it, you can simply click review and create. And first of all, it will going to validate it. If everything is good, then you can simply click on create after the validation is passed. So when you click create, it will going to create a new virtual machine for you instantly. And then once it is created, you can see there is an option to connect where you can download the remote desktop option. Click on that and you can log in into it and work with it. And when you are done with it, you can destroy that machine. And you just have to pay for the duration what you are utilizing. That's it. So that is something that they talk about. VM pricing model, two primary costs for every virtual machine. So one is the storage, which is associated with it, and the compute, means the usage based pricing for compute capacity when the VM is currently allocated. How you'll pay for that? Pay as you go and reserved instances. So pay as you go means you created a machine with a pay as you go model till the moment you are utilizing that resource. Right, you have to pay for it. When you delete that resource, then you don't have to pay for it afterwards. But sometimes it happens that you know that this virtual machine, you have to use it for at least 1 year or 3 years. So you basically sign a contract with the Azure that, okay, I want to use it for 3 years, right? So that instance is reserved for you. And then the price that you have to pay is much, much cheaper than pay as you go model. Why? Because Azure knows that you have reserved that instance and you might or might not be using it for the whole year, right? But at least they have booked it. So you don't have to pay that much price. Like what travel agents will do. They book hotels for the whole year, right? With a less price. Why? Because they know whenever they want, they have that rooms available, and hotel owners are happy because for the off seasons also they don't have to think about how to sell that because it is already sold to the vendors, and so they can say, okay, we'll give you all the rooms in the hotel with a less price. So that same thing, that is what reserved instances are all about. VM storage options, as we have seen it, right? We can attach the disks, right, with the virtual machine when we are creating it. One will going to hold the operating system, which has a very less space just to work with the operating system. But if you want to work with your own disks, own data, then you can attach the disk to it. One is a managed disk and another is unmanaged disks. So managed disks basically are the one that is managed by Azure. Azure is responsible for taking the backups and everything. But unmanaged disk, it is my responsibility to manage it, to decide that how I'm going to take a backup, right? What is the speed of it, capacity, everything. It is the responsibility of a user who is working with that. Whenever we want to create a virtual machine, if their questions can come, what are the ways by which we can create a Azure resources? It depends on the resource. Let's say virtual machine. We can create it with the portal, resource manager template, ARM, Azure PowerShell, CLI, and programmatic APIs. So you have various tools available, then you can work with it. Programmatic APIs means SDKs. You can download the SDKs for the respected language. Like I have SDK for .NET. I can have SDK for Python. So I can use those SDKs to interact with the resources. By default, whatever instructions you will pass, either from the portal, either from the resource manager, PowerShell, CLI, they will go to the application programming APIs, application programming interface available on Azure, which gets the request and then execute the request. So that is something that this module is going to talk about, and questions will definitely come. One of the questions will come based on that. Now there is a concept of availability. Now, as I was creating a virtual machine and I shown you that option, that is, there is a concept of availability set. So if I just create one virtual machine, right, it will be available, let's say on server 1 in the rack. So what if that server goes down? What if the whole racks goes down or the whole data center goes down? Or what happened if Microsoft basically shut down that server for updates? So your information will be lost. So in that case, we will work with the concept of availability set. And we're going to talk about what is an availability set now. Availability set is basically a concept where you can host similar type of resources, right? Let's say I want to have 5 virtual machines for load balancing, right? And I want that if one is down, another one will take a benefit of it, or other machine can serve the request. So I will work with availability set. Whenever you create availability set, it will ask you how many update domains and fault domains you want. So I'm going to just write down that. Sorry. Availability set, it is a way by which we can overcome from the situation of planned outage or natural failures or disaster. Now, whenever you create availability set, it will going to have the fault domains and update domains in it. It will create that for you. So by default, when you create availability set, it will going to create 2 things for you. One is fault domain and update domain. Now, whenever you talk about this, by default, it will create 2 fault domains and 5 update domains, but you can change this setting. Whenever you say, I want to create a first virtual machine, I will put that into availability set. Where it will go with the fault domain 0 because it's array based index, is 0 based index, and update domain 0. So let's change it to 0 just to make it more sense. And I will create a table to make the things clear. Resource. Okay. So resource, fault domain, and update domain. So first I created a virtual machine 1, and it will go to fault domain 0 and update domain 0, UD 0. So update domain is a logical container. Virtual machine 2 with the same configuration, right? Because I want load balancing failovers. If one virtual machine fails, then it must be served from virtual machine 2. Request must be served. So it will go to fault domain 1 and update domain 1. Then I created another instance of the same virtual machine and I deployed it in the same availability set. It will go to fault domain 0 again because only we have 2 fault domains. So fault domain 0 and update domain 0. Now you can see that a fault domain basically refer to the rack. So this is one fault domain, this is another fault domain. And wherever it is created, on which server, it will decide, it will wrap them together under update domain. So in this, I created first virtual machine. For virtual machine is created here on the rack 1, that is fault domain 0. And the second virtual machine will be available, let's say, on this second rack. So server 2 holds my second instance of it, virtual machine 2. Now, if you think about that, these two will be treated as update domain, right? And this is a fault domain. Now, if due to any reason, if your whole rack fails, so fault domain 0 fails, it means that all the resources in that fault domain will not be available. So this and this will fail. It means that virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 3 is not available, but virtual machine 2, because it is on another rack, it is available. That is a natural calamity due to power outage, due to network failure, any reason. But if Microsoft want to go with the planned updates, he says that I will not update all the domains altogether. I will update the update domain 0 first. So update domain 0 means logically all the machines, all the resources that are in it will be updated altogether. So in this update domain 0, we have virtual machine 3 and virtual machine 1. No matter on which fault domain they are, they will be shut down and restarted. During that time, update domain 1 says that I have a copy of that and I will serve the resources from it. So you can decide that what resources you want to keep it in the availability set, and Azure will manage it for you. That's what the concept of availability set is all about. Availability set, update domains, and the fault domains. That's what we talked about. Rest, you have a Microsoft content that you can go further to go in more depth. So you can see that in this machine, right, in this diagram, virtual machines, right, are in one availability set 1, and SQL Server is in another availability set. Why? Because availability set keeps the same type of resources. So if availability set, which is in blue, it is basically says that if my first rack fails, only the SQL Server 1 will go and SQL Server 2 is still available, right? And same with the virtual machines. And rest of the concept, I have already explained it to you. And we have seen that how we can create a Azure virtual machine using Azure portal. Let's see whether it has been created or not. So yes, it is created. So when I go to the resource, my virtual machine is there. It is running. It is in east US. Public IP address is this one. Private IP address is this. And I can at any point of time, I can stop and restart and even delete it. Because it is already started, I can click on connect and I can say I want to connect it with RDP. I can download the RDP files and then I will use the username and password that I have given at the time of creating it to connect to it. So I click on that, connect, I will feel after that this machine belongs to me, right? And it is on my premises. So it needs a good internet, right? That is first thing that you have to keep in mind. So configuring the remote session, trying to connect to the Azure. You can see this is 3389 port is a remote desktop port. So you are very much aware about the RDPs, right? So I'm not going to waste our time in this. So I'm just keep it in running, and then I will move to the next part of this. So this is how we created a virtual machine. Then even we can create a virtual machine with a PowerShell. So we have PowerShell SDKs. We can download the CLIs from the Microsoft site. Once we can download the PowerShell and SDK toolkit, then we can use the command connect, because whenever we want to run any command, it has to connect or execute on Azure. So I will run the command called connect Azure RM account. It will ask me username and password. Once it is connected, then I can do whatever I feel. I can create a new resource group. So with the command new Azure RM resource group name, I want to create a resource group with the my resource group name and in East US location. Once the resource group is created, I can even now create a virtual machine, and then I can specify the same parameters that I have specified, like resource group name, in which resource group it will be created, what name you want to give to the VM, in which location it will be available, virtual network if it is there, name, otherwise it will create on the fly, subnet, security group name, and so on. Once you define this and you run that, your virtual machine will be created. You can even get the detailed information about the resources that are there. So you can see that get Azure RM public IP address. So this is the command that will give you the IP address. Then once it is there, you can use MSTSC to connect to it, and then you can install the Windows feature into the virtual machine that you are connected to. So anything that you want, you can do it, because it is your own virtual machine. It is your own machine and you are the owner of it, and you can decide who can access that machine. So this is similarly, if you are a programmer and you want to write a code to create a virtual machine or to manipulate the resources on Azure, you must download the SDK. And once you have an respected SDK, you can write a code to work with it. So they are just talking about that you need to have the credentials to communicate with Azure. So you will get a credentials and then use that credentials whenever you are running your command. Now the questions that will come in exam, till now they are multiple choice, right? So they will go and give you a scenario and they will give you four answers. You have to choose one or more answers from there. You have a drag and drop questions, right? So these are the type of questions that will come, right? There is no lab environment till now, but yes, definitely in the latest version of the exams, they will going to create a lab environment for you where you have to implement that. It is not all only multiple choice. So please keep that thing in mind, that whatever new exams are coming, new version of that exams are coming, please expect the labs into it. But till now, just multiple choice questions are there. So this is what they are trying to talk about, that how to create virtual machines, right? Unfortunately, we don't have much time into it, but if you have any questions, you can just send the question in when we have a free time, like after that, when we take a break, we can talk on that. Okay, so that's something that they talk about, how to work with the virtual machines using the code, PowerShell code and the templates. So as you can see that here, we have the virtual machine. Now we can connect to it. So it is configuring and I can get into that machine. So I'm in that machine. And now once I'm in that machine, I can do anything that I want. I can install any software. I can add any services, port open, firewall rules, whatever I feel like I can do that because this machine belongs to me. And when I'm done with that, I can even delete that. So just waiting for this to get complete. Just a second. Bear with me for a minute. Not allowing me to come out of it. So we need to wait for a minute. Taking too much time. Sorry, guys. Even I'm not able to come back to my normal desktop. Okay. With team, I have to stop sharing and then I can do that maybe. Okay. So preparing window. These demonstrations are time consuming actually. So till the moment it is booting, right? I can just tell you a little bit more on that, that once the virtual machine is created, so it is using some storage, it is using some compute resources. So I have to pay for all those resources that it is consuming. Can I need to, I think, stop presenting for a minute. Can I just do that if you don't mind, because I'm not able to get back to my main machine.
Go ahead, Sachin. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I think I need to kill that, or yeah. I'm sharing my screen again. So you can see that this is just a machine which is now booting. So I have minimized it. So I'm coming back to the main screen. So you can see that, as I told you, no matter what type of tool you use to send an instruction to Azure, it will actually go to the APIs that is running on Azure, which will execute your task. So choice is yours, that whether you want to go with the client SDK, RESTful APIs, portal, CLI, or PowerShell. But the main motive is that you want to hit the Azure resources. So whatever you are good in it, you can work with it depending on your skill levels. And in Azure, they might ask you, in the exam, they might ask you about questions about PowerShell and CLI commands to achieve these simple goals. So terminologies, we have discussed the resources, resource group, resource providers, resource managed template, and declarative syntax. I'm going to talk about something about this. So you can see that this is the portal where I have this resource. So what I can do is I can go to the resource group section. I will see all the resource groups that I have. I will find the resource group, that is this one that I created. And here, there is an option to click on export template. And here, this is the actual template. So your template is composed of parameters, variables, and resources. So this is a resource, right, which says that in this resource group, whatever resources are there, right, how they are created. So what resources are there, what configurations they need, what settings they need, everything is defined there. And to make it dynamic, they are getting the value from the parameters. So if you look into the parameters, they have some parameters here. So these parameters basically have the values which you are consuming it in your template. So when you download this template, right, you can use this template to create as many resource groups as you want with the same settings. So your resource group will have all these resources, maybe in the production environment or in the same environment if you change the value of the parameters. So click on the parameters, you can see virtual machine names. You can set it here, and then you can use this information in your template. So that's what the templates are all about. So Azure Resource Manager templates basically are the files which specify what resources are there in the resource group, what parameters they have, which they are using in template, and some variables if you want to work with. And these are reusable templates. So that's something that they talk about. Declarative syntax. Declarative, the act of describing your resources by using the template instead of manually creating the resource. So when you are manually creating the resource, you have to repeat the same thing again and again. But with the help of template, you define once and use it as many times as you want. If you're a programmer, you are good with the knowledge of or concept of classes. So classes is just like a template, and you can create as many objects as you want based on that. This is a resource manager template deployment. So there are resources. In this, they created a resource called, which is of type storage account. This is the name of it, location, what SKU they're using, kind, properties if you want to set. And then you submit a put request where you specify, I want to use this template to create a new storage account. So with this template, you can create as many storage account as you want, but this name has to be changed. So 3-tier Azure Resource Manager template. So they're just talking about different type of templates that you want to have. You can have one template that will going to have everything in it, or your template may be calling other templates behind the scenes, means referencing other templates. So in this case, you can have 3 templates, right? And you have a master template. One master template is pointing to other 3 templates. So if you give master templates to other, so that will help us to create all other resources along with it. So this is something and they are trying to talk about. So this is one template, 3-tier template. When you create this template, it has SQL Server, app services, and virtual machines. They're referencing each other. So what you can do is you can create a parent template. In that parent template, you will choose the nested template, one for the SQL DB, one for app service, one for virtual machines. And if you give the parent template to anyone, then it will internally refer the SQL template, app service template, and virtual machine template, which will be loaded and used at the runtime. This is just what I have shown it to you, right? Per resource also you can get that, or the resource group level. I have shown it to you at a resource group level. But if you go in a particular resource, you will get the automation script. In the automation script, you will see the same thing like template and the parameters. And even you will see the PowerShell command or .NET code by you can use to deploy these templates. Then we have create resource manage template by using the Visual Studio Code. So they are just using the commands that you can see. So you can see they are working with a group, resource group. So they created a resource group. Then they say AZ group deployment create. So they are creating a template file, right, based on the resource group. So what they are trying to do is they are creating a template based on the information that is stored in the resource group. So purely either you can work with the PowerShell command or templates from the graphical section like from portal.azure.com, or you can use .NET code to generate the template and then use that template to create more resources. Now configure disk encryption. So whenever we are working with the virtual machines or my own machine, if you look into this machine, right, it is still communicating. So what we can do is, let me show you here. So if you look into this machine, if I go to the PC, I have C drive, D drive, and E drive. So anybody who has a permission, who access my machine, they can easily go into the drive and see what content I have. So I can encrypt these drives. So what are the ways of encrypting these drives? So that is something that they are trying to talk about in this whole section. So here we have to know what is an encryption. Encryption is a technique by which we can make my information senseless or meaningless. How we can do that? By applying some algorithms onto it. We have two categories of algorithm. One is symmetric, another is asymmetric. Symmetric algorithm is something where we use the same key to encrypt and decrypt the data. So in this case, if I want to send some data to you, I will encrypt it with some algorithm, right? And I use a key in that algorithm to achieve that. Now, when you want to decrypt it, you have to use the same algorithm with the same key to decrypt it. But if that key is compromised, then it will be an issue. Then second is asymmetric encryption, which works with the pair of keys that is used to encrypt the data. So it is like your certificates. In your certificate, you have public key and private key. So what I can do is I can make the private key available to you in some secure manner, and I will encrypt the data with a public key, and then you can use that private key to decrypt the data. So that is what symmetric and asymmetric encryption is all about. Now, key management. Whenever you want to encrypt and decrypt the data, so you can decide that how your key can be managed. Either it can be managed by the client or managed by the Azure. Manage disk protection. Now you have the disks, right? So either you can use storage service encryption or Azure disk encryption. When you use Azure disk encryption, it means that you are using third-party tool to encrypt it like BitLocker. But if you want to use the storage service encryption, in this case, Azure is going to encrypt the data at rest. Means before storing the data at rest, it will encrypt it. And then when you want to decrypt it, when you want to read it, you can decrypt it and then you can use it. That is protect storage data at rest. When it is at rest, means when it is saved on some persistent storage, you want that it should be in an encrypted format. Whereas the drives can be encrypted and decrypted with the BitLocker. So how to encrypt the disks? So they are talking about the concept of key vault. So what is a key vault? Key vault basically is one of the Azure service that says that I am going to store your information as key value pair in it. And as soon as you store the data in it, right, key value pair, I will encrypt that data. And if anybody want to read that key value pair, they have to access the key vault first. They should have the permission to work with key vault, and then they will get the data which is stored in it based on the key value pair. And your resource, this Azure Key Vault, can decide that what applications can get that information. So he can basically treat them as a managed identities. Managed identities are all those identities that have a permission to read the data from the Key Vault. So whenever you go to Key Vault, you create it. There is an access policy where you can say that whatever information is stored in the Key Vault can be used for disk encryption, right? What is the benefit of using it? So here, if you look into it, you have the option to work with the create resource. You can say, I want to work with a key vault. So you can have a key vault. So you define that I want to create a key vault. You specify the settings, right? There is an access policy, second tab. In the access policy, you can see Azure disk encryption for volume encryption, Azure resource manager for template deployment, Azure virtual machines for deployment. Means whatever keys you will going to store here, what these keys can do. These keys can be used to work with the code that is going to deploy the template for deploying virtual machines, as well as to encrypt and decrypt the volumes. So you can select this setting when you're creating a key vault, and when you are adding the keys, those keys can be used for achieving the respected goal. So yes, this question might come in your exam, that how to configure your key vault to allow encryption of the volumes. So they will show you these some options, right? And you have to select one of the option from the answer list. So this is what they try to talk about. So all the options that I have discussed. So PowerShell command is there that helps you to encrypt the resource. You can see AZ key vault update. They update the key value pair, right? And you say that, okay, whatever key vault you have in that, I want to enable the encryption. So initially, when they created the key vault, they have not selected it. But after that, they feel like they want to do it. So either graphically, you can go to the access policy and enable it, or you can run this command to achieve that goal. Once it is there, then you can see they are running the command Azure AZ-VM encryption enabled. Resource group, virtual machine, VM name, disk encryption key vault. That is, I want to use the key vault for where the keys are stored, which can help you to encrypt the volumes, all volume, OS or data. If you say all, so disk which contain the OS as well as the data, all are encrypted, or you can choose which one you want to encrypt. So there are some switches that you can specify. And you can use AZ-VM encryption show resource group, the name, the VM name, which is encrypted, right, within the resource group. So you will get a complete details about. These are the other commands that you can check that out. This is with PowerShell. This is with Azure CLI. So now in this first lesson, we have a last topic which is left, that is all about containerized application. So I will start that virtual machine, the PowerPoint presentation for that. That is the third one. Sorry, Azure batch will come later. Right, let me just talk about this containerized solutions because they are related. So what is a containerized solution? After that, maybe we can go with the question and answer session just for 10 minutes. So containerized solution. So I would like to show you something. I would like to explain something about containerized solutions, why we need it, what are the benefits of it, and how we can achieve it. So let's begin with this concept about the containerized solutions. So first of all, I'll just talk about the difference, right, between the virtual machine and the containerized application, and what benefits you will get from the containerized applications. As we have seen at virtual machines, right? So I will draw that and explain it. In virtual machines, basically it is a hypervisor. So you can see that on my machine, if I run Hyper-V, so this is a hypervisor manager. When it opens, it will show me that I have 3 virtual machines that are available. And if I click on any of the virtual machine, if I go to the settings of it, you can see it says that how much RAM it needs, right? So I can click on the memory. I'm giving 5000 MB RAM, right? Processes, how much processor I want, and what hard drives I want to associate it with it. Now this RAM, what I'm giving it to it, actually it is taken from my main machine. So physical hardware information or resources are shared. So if I just try to draw this, so this is my main operating system. In this main OS, I have 16 GB RAM and 500 GB of hard disk, or 1 terabyte of hard disk to make more, 1 TB of hard disk. Now I want to have another operating system into it. Let's say main operating system is Windows 10, and it supports the virtualization. When it supports the virtualization, I can work with the hypervisor. And then we have multiple virtual machines that we can create on that. So I created the first virtual machine. Maybe Windows 7, and I give like 4 GB of RAM and 250 GB of hard disk I have associated with it. Then I created another virtual machine, and I say that Linux, which needs 2 GB of RAM and 100 GB of hard disk. And this main operating system says that I need 4 GB for myself, right? And 250 GB space and 250 GB for myself out of this. So 4 GB plus 4 GB, 8 GB, 9, 10. Still, I have 6 GB RAM. So I can create another virtual machine, Windows Server 2016, and I allocate like 5 GB of RAM to it and maybe 250 GB hard disk. Still, I left with 1 GB that is going to be used by the main operating system till now. But if I try to create another virtual machine with 2 GB, it will say, sorry, it is not available. Now, the benefit is that I can run all the 3 machines at the same time. But the problem is that each virtual machine has its own operating system. They will take time to boot. Right? So first problem. Secondly, if I want to move it from the developer environment to production environment, then I have to create an image of it, which is approximately same. Like, let's assume that it is like 100 GB, right? Even after zip it. So it is hard to migrate. So if I want the same infrastructure to be reconfigured, so it is quite difficult to achieve that. Where here comes your containers. So I'm going to work with the containers now. Containers basically is self-contained package. You can say that self-contained package. Self-contained package which has the information about application and OS basic information or OS details or resources which it needs like a binary of the OS files which it needs. Now, in the same scenario, whenever I have a main machine, this is my main OS as before with the same configuration, 16 GB and 1 terabyte. So I want to run an application, right, which needs a .NET framework. So it needs a .NET framework and Windows operating system or Linux. So how to do that? I don't want to use hypervisor. So I will take the help of the containerized concept. So I need a tool called Docker service. So Docker host. This Docker host will provide the kernel resources. So container is all about sharing the kernel resources, right? Like DLLs which your application needs. So is that it can be a Windows Docker host or it can be a Linux host. If it is a Windows, I can only run Windows containers. If it is a Linux, I can run the Linux host. So I created first machine. You can see that I created a first container. And that container basically says that I'm going to have application 1 plus .NET framework information which it needs and binaries which allow you to run the main container. So because it is not using a complete operating system, it is much more faster to load as well as it is much more lightweight. And we can create another container which container 2 application plus it needs .NET different version 2.0 SDK plus OS binaries. So similarly, I can have many containers, and each container does not need the full operating system, so it needs less RAM to work on it, less space. So I can run as many containers as I want onto it, depending on obviously the maximum space. But yes, number of containers that I can run on the main machine is much higher than the virtual machines that I'm creating, because these are the self-contained virtual machines, complete machines, because of the operating system and all the applications. But it contains only the binaries that are responsible for running the operating system plus application information. Rest of the information is provided by the Docker. So they share the main OS features from the Docker host, and they will just need the binaries to connect to that. Along with that, they have their own customized application. Now, I can use this information to regenerate as many containers I want based on the images. We'll talk about how these containers are created, and then we can make it clear that how easy to make or redeploy the same container multiple times on the production, development, and different environments. So this is what containers are all about. Now, if you want to work with the containers, right, what benefits you will get, that's something that we will going to talk about, right, after some time. But we need to think about that how these things work in a container, right? What are things that you have to keep in mind? How these containers are created. So whenever you want to work with a container, there are few terms and details that you need to talk about, you need to understand. So what are Docker containers? First thing, how we can deploy them to Azure, how we can create and publish container images. So new word comes, that is container images, right? Then we have, what are the options? Options for hosting in Azure. So these are a few things that we should know when we are working with Azure. So first of all, when we need to talk about Azure, so some basics need to be cleared. Basics. The first thing is that you need to know about images. And then we'll talk about containers. So what is an image? Image equals to application plus dependencies. So image is nothing, it is a template which defines what type of application you need, what type of dependencies that application has, and what OS information it needs. And when we talk about a container, what is a container? It is an instance. It is an instance or object, you can say that. Object of based on image. Image, right. So that's what a container is all about. So if I have an image which says that if you use this image, what applications you will get, what dependencies you will get, what OS it requires, then you can create as many containers as you want based on that image. Now, a few more things about container. Containers runs on Docker host. Docker host basically is a platform that provides the resources that your application needs or your container needs. Like works the same everywhere. provide memory and CPU to the containers. CPU resources. It has a publish ports. So all the requests that you will send will go to the Docker, and Docker will send that information to the respected container. As you can see in this case, so this is a Docker host. These are the containers too. So whenever you send a request, it will go to the Docker host. It has a port mapping, and based on that, it will decide whether your request will be redirected to container 1 or container 2. It works with the publish ports and disk access, image only. So which type of data you can access, that we'll talk about later. That disk access is there, how you will add some data into it. Now the benefit is that at any point of time you can start and stop the container, and when you start the container, it won't take much time to start it because it doesn't have the full operating system. Containers can be started or stopped, and we can create as many instances as I want based on the same image as we discussed. Now let's talk about something about image. Images are based on layered architecture, layered structure. Now what is layered structure? Right, that we need to talk about, and we must know that images are read-only. Once created, once deployed, we cannot make changes into it, or read-only. Now let's take an example that I've created an image. So first image that I created basically says that I need to have Elasticsearch. And this image basically is based on another image. This image is based on another image that is called Java, because to work with the Elasticsearch, you need to have some operating system. So it works with the Java, and Java says that Java need to be installed an operating system. Let's say Ubuntu. So we have 3 images available: the image 1, image 2, and then we have image 3. So 3 images are there, and when I created an image 1, I say that it needs image 2, and when this Java image was created, it says that I need the Ubuntu image. So if you look into the size of it, so total size of this image, assume that it is 504 MB. So the size of the Java image, total size, will be equal to 504 plus its own size to where the Java install, let's say 196 byte. And the size of this will be total size equals to 504 plus 196 plus maybe 300, right? So when you get it, you will not have this complete image. It says that I want to have this image, and then it says that I need to have this image. So behind the scenes, when you create a container based on that, it will going to load all the images and then generate a container based on that. So your container will going to have Elasticsearch configured, which is using Java, and your operating system will be Ubuntu. Now these image files basically are created from the file called Docker file. So to generate this image file, we have to create a Docker file. Docker file is just like it is like a YAML file, an XML file. You can say that, not XML, YAML file, where you will define that what type of resources you need. It contains the instructions that I want to load this and I want to load this and I want to install these respected software. Once that Docker file is there, then we can build a image from that, and from that image we will going to construct the container. So diagrammatically the process starts by creating a Docker file. You create a Docker file. From that Docker file you create an image, and from that image you can create one or more containers. Now when I have this Docker file, I created an image. Now I want that image can be used to create a container. So either if I have it locally, I can create a container for it. But if I want that, it should be available to everyone. So I need to store it in central repository. So the central repository is Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a publicly available centralized repository where if I publish my image, then anyone who has a permission, who has account there, they can get that image and create a container. So it is like a Play Store, centralized Play Store. But if I want to work privately, like only my organization can use that image, so we can use the Azure Kubernetes service, right? Container registry basically. So we have Azure Container Registry. In the Azure Container Registry, I can upload this image and only the people who have access to it can work with it. So if we want to reuse it, we need to publish it in a central repository. And that one is Docker Hub. That is public. And second one is Azure Container Registry. That is private location for a tenancy. Now this is something that they talk about, right? Docker Hub or the container registry. Now once it is in the container registry, I can connect to the container registry, get the image and create a container for it. But I'm creating the containers on my own. But if I have hundreds of containers that I want to create and I want to manage that scaling up, scaling down, right, failures, then it is very much difficult for me to manage it. So we have a Kubernetes services, right, which is orchestration platform, which helps me to achieve that goal. So in the course, the Kubernetes is another topic that they will going to ask in the exam. So this is basically what they are trying to talk about in this create containerized solutions. Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, which is the orchestration platform. They went in a reverse order. I did it from here because basic, what is an image, how to create an image from the Docker file, what is the instance of the container, and then if you want to manage more than one containers, then load balancing failures, it is very much difficult for you to work with it. Then you have to work with the Kubernetes. But whatever image you have created, if you want to use it multiple times, so put that into the container registry. Now you can pull that image from the container registry and create an instance of it. But if you don't want to do it manually, then you can work with the Kubernetes service, which create a cluster of the nodes where your containers will be managed. So Kubernetes helps you to achieve that goal. So this module is going to talk about all these things. That is what is Kubernetes, right? How these containers are created. And when you create a cluster, it will have two parts. One is a cluster master, which is managed by Azure. You don't have to pay for it. And we have a customer managed. So when you're creating a cluster, you will define how many nodes you want. Nodes means where virtual machines will run, where your containers will be hosted. So you say that 3 nodes. So it means that you can have 3 nodes where your containers will be loaded. And kubectl is responsible. It's a command line utility that allows you to manage all the resources that is running in that respected node. So whatever nodes you are running here, you have to pay for that node and the compute resources. So this is something that you have to go through it in depth, right? I have given you the crux of it, but yes, if you want to go in depth, please go through this course contents, right? But it is nothing more than these basic concepts that I have talked about. So you need to understand what Docker file look likes, right? And then when you create a Docker file, how you will create an image of it. We have a PowerShell command that you can, or CLI commands that you can use it to generate an image. Once that image is created, then you can use that image to publish it into the centralized repository that is container service. So you have to create a Azure container registry object, then you can publish it. Once it is there, then you can pull that image and create a containers based on that. So these are the things that you can work with it. Then we will going to talk about just one more thing here, right? That is about your batch service. So from the beginning, batch service, implementing batch jobs by using Azure batch service. Now this is high, basically it is going to be, you will going to use it when you have a high performance computing. High performance computing basically means that if you have a large amount of process, right, that if you have a workload that take a lot of time to execute it, right? So how to achieve that goal? So in that case, you can basically say that I want to run my task by dividing it and running it parallelly. But if you have to do it on your own, then it will be a tedious job, right? So you can take the help of Azure batch service. So this is, let's say, your workload. This is your some files, right? Or your input. And the scenario is, let's say I want to convert some MP3 files or MP4 files into MP3. So I have MP4 files, right? So 1.mp4 and so on, 2.mp4 and so on you have. Now you want to process it. So you basically send this information where it is processed. So it is processed here. And then once it is processed, then it will be stored as output. So all MP3 files output is generated where you have MP3 versions of it, MP3 version of all the files, right? 1.mp3 and so on. But the thing is that if you have more files, it will take more time to process it. So what you can do is, you want that, is it possible that I can run multiple processes at the same time? So in that case, what you can do is you can divide your input into multiple files and run them parallelly. But how to run them parallelly, right? That can be automated, that can be achieved with the help of batch account or the batch service. Azure batch service says that you can decide that what type of task you want to perform, associate it with me, and I will do it for you. So there are a few terms that they are trying to talk about in it, which we will going to talk about here. So batch service, when you want to work with the batch service, the terms will be available called batch account. Second, you will going to work with a pool, then job, then tasks. So this is something that you talk about, and pool is going to work with the nodes. So the thing is, whenever you want to work with this batch service, so you have to create a batch account. You created a batch account, and once you create a batch account, you will define some names. You have to define the name, region where it is created, and some other settings. When the batch account is created, then within that batch account, you will say that I want to create pool. Pool is a collection of the nodes. right? Like a virtual machines. So you created a pool 1, and you will define how many nodes you want to have in it. So I will define a node 1. I will define node 1, node 2, and node 3. Let's say I say that I need to have 3 nodes here. So node 3, node 2 and node 3, sorry. Node 2, and I will define the node 3. So it will have 3 nodes, node 3. Now, once you have defined that pool, these nodes basically can be dedicated, or basically they can be created on the fly when required, like they are not fixed, right? High priority and low priority, you can say that. Then you actually created a job. So you say that, okay, I created a job. When you create a job, every job has a job ID, and every job is associated with a pool. So it says that I am associated with the job ID, and I will run in pool 1. My job will be associated with pool 1. So in that job, you will going to create the tasks. So you created a task 1. You created a task 2. Let me make it small, T1 and T2 and T3 and T4. So T3 and T4. So I have 4 tasks. As soon as these tasks are created, so I have divided this file. So this input file, let's say, into 4 files, and I have defined the application. That application will take this files as an input. So every task is calling my code, which is expecting 1 file as a parameter. So I have divided that file, the input file, as into 4 files, and my code, which this task is executing. So it is executing, let's say, the code. It is executing some code here. So code, and this code is expecting input file 1, right? Input file 1. And task 2 is also pointing to the same code, right? So same code I have assigned to task 2 also. So code, same code, which is expecting input file 2. So similarly, all the tasks are configured. Now, as soon as they are created and they start working on it, so first task will go to node 1, second task will go to node 2, and task 3 will go to node 3. But task 4 will wait. As soon as any node will get free, then task 4 will be assigned to that node. So in this case, 3 nodes means 3 tasks will work in parallel, and as soon as one of the tasks gets completed, the task 4 will be assigned to it. So it is your responsibility to decide that whenever you are creating a task, what code it will going to call and any information that code needs. And then when you perform that task, that process will be assigned automatically to the nodes, and it will achieve the task for you. Now, if at any point of time, if anything goes wrong to the node, it is the responsibility of batch account to handle that. So that is something that this whole scenario is going to talk about. You can see that I have a Azure. In that I have a pool, right? And pool has a nodes, compute nodes. When I have a job which has tasks that are assigned to the individual nodes, and this is managed by the Azure batch. Now your application is responsible for uploading the input files app. So the code that your tasks are calling are defined it here, and the files are also there. So your task, when it executes, it will call the file that will contain the logic that it need to apply, and then it install it into this virtual machine, and then it will take the input files, process it, and then store it or upload it into the output folder. So this is something that you have to work on. So whatever code you need to run with a task, it actually need to be uploaded into the storage account. So you must have a storage account. Storage account. In the storage account, we have a containers section. This container is not like what container we talked about. It is like a blob container, where I will create folders, right? The first folder that I will create is an application, just giving it a name, application, and this will contain the code that these tasks are calling. And then we will have another that I call it input folder, which will contain the files, input files like file1, file2, which contains the information that need to be converted, right? So I'll just say that file1.mp3, mp4, right? File2.mp4 and so on. And third is output folder. Now, when this task is executed, it says that I need file1. This file is passed to that code. It will convert that into mp3 and paste and store it in output. The same thing it is doing it, but it works with the file2. So this is how you can configure your batch account. Now, this batch account, pool, job, everything can be configured either with a portal, with a PowerShell CI or CLI, or with the .NET SDK. So that is the crux that what we have discussed. So kindly, now we have already discussed everything, right? Whatever I know about this, and I can explain it in that small duration of the time, right? So now it is the time for Q&A, question and answer session. So Mr. Steve, if you are there, can you please take over? Hello.
Sure. Hi, I'm still there.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So we've got a couple of questions over in the chat window. If you can take a look at that.
Okay. Can you push it to me, please?
Yep, it should be visible to you, right, in the chat window?
Let me see. Okay. New. Okay, good.
Just check the publish.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Do we have any multiple choice questions, answers, documents available for preparation for the exam? I will be sharing our own like Qubit. We have created a small question and answers section, but it is not the real-time one. It is just for the preparation one. I will be sharing that with you guys. And otherwise, on the internet, you will find a lot of sites where you can get it, but we cannot guarantee anything. Microsoft is really good because they know that people are keeping an eye on the questions that comes into exam, so they change it frequently. So we never rely on that. Only experience will work. But yes, you will get a guidelines that how the exams can come. Later to okay, PP2, yes, PPTX2 we have just covered it. That is batch 1. Kubernetes, Kubernetes I have just talked about, right? If you have any further questions on Kubernetes, you can just ask me, please. Because we have a time limitation, so I just told you that Kubernetes is like an orchestration platform which allows you to manage your nodes, right? That is, when you create a Kubernetes, it defines the cluster. Cluster is nothing; it's the nodes where your containers will going to run. So it is automation process. You can say that. Any other question?
Hey Sachin, I think there's one question right on top on the VM settings. I'm not sure if you've addressed that.
Oh, yes.
The first one.
Yeah. Is it possible to change VM settings afterwards? Yes, we can change it. I'll just share my, let me go to the virtual machine that I've created. So let me go to that Azure portal. So this is the Azure portal. Let me go to home and I will click on the virtual machine that I have created. So this is the virtual machine and you can see that what type of changes you want. First of all, you can see that disks. So you can click on the disk. You can basically encrypt the disk, right? You can add more disks to them, right? Then if you want, you can go to the size of the virtual machine. You can change the size, right? Change the size. Basically, it's a horizontal. It is basically a vertical scaling. In the same machine, you are adding more instances to it, right? So that is horizontal scaling is possible. If you want vertical scaling, then availability set is the option. Then if you want to work with the other sections like backups, right, you have to do it on your own, right? What else? What type of things? Reset password. Yes, you can do it from here. So yes, these are the things that you can work with. Networking, what we configured, you click on the networking. So you can see that we have inbound port rules, outbound port rules. You can click on inbound port rules and add inbound port rules of your choice. Whatever you have port rules that you have created, you can delete it. Some inbound rules are already there, right? So you can play with them. Outbound port rules are there, which you can manage from here. So yes, this changes can be done here after the virtual machine is created. Even after the creating a virtual machine, when you are done with it, you can stop, you can restart, right? Capture, you can generate an image of it so that that image can be used to create more virtual machines for it, but it is a complete process that you have to follow, right? And when you are done with it, you don't want it further, you can delete that. So these are the things that, yes, you can play with. More you play, more you will learn. So let me go back to the question section.
Yeah. A couple of more questions that just came in.
That's good. So let me. Is it necessary to learn how to do things in different ways for the exam? Not actually, but yes, you should have an idea about it, right? Because few questions will come from the CLI section and the PowerShell section. So not in depth, but basic things you should know about it. If you describe about Helm and Kubernetes, though we have not described it in more depth, but we can go to it, right? After a break, we can come back to the Helm. Can we use all services in free account? Basically, what happens whenever you talk about a free account, I will come back to Helm just after some time, please. Let me talk about the basic questions first. So when we talk about the free account, right? So there are two ways. One, what Microsoft is promoting nowadays, that they give a Azure Pass. So when they give a Azure Pass, they basically give you a $50 credit for 1 month. So either 1 month expires or your credit expires. So it means that whatever resources you're consuming, it will be charged from that $50. But when you create your free account, you use the credit card, you attach your credit card, and they gave you roughly $200 that has to be consumed within 1 month. And after that, only 25 free services are available throughout the year. And after that, whatever service you will use, you have to pay for that. So this is something that your questions is talk about. How to get voucher for that exam, that Mr. Steve will guide you.
Yes, I think I can address that question. So we've laid out a pretty robust process. If you visit the link that I just shared right now on the chat window, please go ahead and take a look at the site. You have options to take up the MS Learn trainings, internal trainings, and also you have options to request for a voucher based on completion of an assessment. So do take a look at the site. There are a couple of more. I'm just pushing them, publishing them, Sachin.
Yes. Okay. What is the difference between capture and export template? Okay, so when we say export template, so it basically generates the YAML file, right? That can be used to regenerate the resources of the same type, right? With the different parameters that you will specify, right? So you should know about that what type of template it is, right? What resources it is creating, right? But when we say capture, it is just an image file. So you won't be able to look into it, what is inside, right? It is just a pre-compiled image. And then you choose an image, all the resources will be created for you. So that image is stored in the storage area. And from there, you can refer it and create a virtual machines based on that. So capture is only for the virtual machines, right? Because it generates an image which helps you to generate a virtual machine. But when we say templates, so template is a general concept for every resource. So whatever resource you will going to create in Azure has a template associated with it. And then template will specify that what are the settings for that resource, what is the name of that resource, and other information about it, configuration settings. So you can use that template to create that resource. So template is not just for VM. It is for other resources. But when we say capture, it is basically generating an image by which you can create a virtual machine. So that is the main difference between capture and export template in VM. Export means templates. But if you choose export template specifically for VM, if you're talking about, then basically they are quite same, because both of them will allow you to generate a virtual machines. The only difference is that after the image is created, right, you cannot dig into. But if template is there, you can customize it as per your requirement. And that template can be created from Visual Studio even, from the very beginning. If you like the documents, that Word document that I've created, I will love to share it with you guys. Cognito Services is not, is a part of the free account. If you talk about a free account, yes, when you create a first time account, when register it as a free account, yes, you can work with the Cognito Services. Are this session going to be available offline later? I cannot comment on that, but Mr. Steve?
Yeah, Sachin, I think I had responded in the chat box as well. Yes, these sessions are being recorded, and we are available on the Cloud Week site, the link that I had just posted on the side.
Okay.
And there's just one more question which just came in.
Is there any other longer term options for prep for the mix of resources who may already be? I didn't get this question. Can you just let me know about it? Like, you are talking about other resources from where you can get it? The details about how to prepare for that or something else? Can you please, Mr. Jess, if it's possible, can you elaborate that?
Sachin, I think he's just called out for certificates and also for test environments to do prep.
Okay, for certificates and also for test environment to do prep. So I'm not sure about what you have in your Accenture, right? What resources you have, but yes, if you don't find any resource, then we have a channel 9 where you can get the videos, tutorials, right? YouTube, plural sites, right? These are the extra resources, but the best resource that I would suggest is doc.microsoft.com, where you will get each and everything in well-documented phase. So first of all, go to docs.microsoft.com, and then if you're not satisfied with that, if you think it is too deep, then find other resources. Okay. So
I don't see any more questions in the chat room.
There is one left, that is for Helm, that I will cover it just after the question and answer session.
Great.
So I think if it is done, then I can come back to Helm and then we can continue whatever as per the curriculum. Okay, so there are no more questions. So Helm. So the question was Helm and Kubernetes. So what is Helm actually? Helm basically is the way by which we can manage the applications that are running in Kubernetes. So what we can do with Helm, we can build and use existing public Helm chart that contains a packaged version of the application code and Kubernetes YAML manifest to deploy the resource. So if I'm talking about the Kubernetes, if I want to dictate the Kubernetes that what type of infrastructure that they need to work on, what type of cluster they need to work on. So either I can do it manually or I can use a YAML file, yet another markup language manifest file where we'll define what type of resources we need. Now, what Helm chart will do, it creates a package of the Kubernetes YAML file and all the applications that are required. And these informations is stored in the centralized repository, that is Azure Container Registry Helm chart repo. And if you want to use Helm, we have a component called Tiller that is installed in our cluster, Kubernetes cluster when we create, and it is the one which manages the installation of the chart which is within the cluster. So Tiller is responsible for getting that chart, opening that package, see and look into it, what type of resources it need to create, what type of applications need to be created, and it is installed. And then my resources are available to the client. Right? So that's what basically Helm is all about. It is basically a way by which it manages the packages. Okay, something lasting longer than 1 month. Okay, something lasting longer than 1 month. Let's say we want to migrate a web application to Azure. The web application will be accessed by external users. What will be the recommendation for cloud deployment for this? Okay, so we have a app services and Azure, which is coming to you. In the next topic, we are going to cover that. Right, app services, where we don't have to think about infrastructure. We create a web application and we directly deploy to Azure. It is a managed service. So load balancing, failovers, right, scaling can be done, can be configured to be automatic. So Azure will take care of it. You just have to create a web application and deploy it. And once it is deployed, it is globally available to the users. And also test environment to do preps. Something lasting longer than 1 month. So I didn't get this. Longer than 1 month. Test environment. So if you have your own account, then I'm not sure that what type of account you have. But if you are working with the free Azure Pass, it is only for 1 month. That only I can commit, but nothing more than that. Okay, the question was about the free account or for the environment and also regarding the certificate validity period. Okay, so as you can see that the first browser site that I've shown it to you, Microsoft is migrating to a new course that is AZ-204, and it is in beta version for the same course, right? It is basically migrating to that. So if you take that exam, I think it will be valid for a certain time, for 3 months, but you have to upgrade it to the new version of it. That is for the exam. What is new? AZ-204 is new. So what is new in AZ-204? AZ-204 is much more organized, I can say that, as compared to AZ-203, because as you can see in AZ-203, we say that it is for the developers, but it contains a lot of extra things which are beyond the scope of the developers, right? But they just want to tell the developers that these are the things which are available, which they can use. But in AZ-204, things are very well organized, and few things like if you talk about the push notification services, right? Those things basically are moved from that. So they are purely focusing on what developers can do on it, mainly. Right. So I think we took a long time and we can come back to the topics. Yes.
Sure, Satya.
Okay. I hope the way we are going through is good, because of the lack of the time, right? Because of the time limitation, we have to cover as much as we can in that, right? this is a tip and tricks, right? So we can't expect everything to be covered. But you have the course material. I'm telling you that you can refer there, right? Once you have an idea. If you have any questions, we can talk about it. Okay. Let me close the slides. Then we will going to talk about the next section. Platform as a service, which we can work with it. So let's see how much we can do it from this today. So develop Azure Platform as a service. That is all about where we are not responsible for managing the infrastructure. So what are those services and how we can take the benefit of those services and what features they provide us. So in this create Azure app service, web app, that is the question that you asked me, that if I have a web application and we want to deploy it to the cloud, what are the things that we need to consider and how we can do that? So that is Azure app services. Web apps basically is the one that helps us to achieve that. Create Azure app service mobile apps, right? And then we have the next topic is all about creating Azure app service API apps. Again, we will use the app service to deploy my APIs into it. So there is a topic about creating API management solutions and using Swagger to document an API app and implement Azure functions. So these are some topics that we can work with, and they all fall into the category called platform as a service. So let's take the first topic. So here, creating Azure App Service Web App. In this, we'll talk about Azure App Service core concepts, creating an Azure App Service web app, and how we can execute the backend tasks related to the web app, with the help of web jobs. Here, Azure App Service core concepts, right? Now, when we talk about Azure, Azure says that I'm not only available to host the services that are created in Microsoft, right? You can create your resources or applications in any of the language, and then you can deploy it on Azure. You can create a .NET application, .NET Core application, Java application, Ruby, Node.js, PHP, Python, whatever you are good in, you can create an application in that technology, and then you can deploy it. And what type of applications? You can create a web applications, RESTful services, mobile app backend services, whatever you want to deploy, right, in the premises of Azure, you can deploy it. Now, the benefit that you are expecting from Azure is you don't want to think about the infrastructure. You don't want to think about that if the service fails. If service fails, then how it will be available to the users. Availability. You don't have to think about availability. You don't have to think about scalability, right? So how to achieve that? So this can be achieved with the help of app services. App service is one of the service in Azure that ask you, when you're creating an app service, it will going to ask you that what type of virtual machine you need. You will specify that I want to have a virtual machines where Windows operating system is there and I need a .NET framework because I need to run the .NET application. Okay, .NET, which version of the .NET framework you need? You choose a framework, and then you specify region, you specify other settings, and when you click OK, the virtual machine will be created for you, but you won't be able to log in into it. You won't get an option to connect to it with a remote desktop because it's not you who is managing it. Azure is managing it. Every service that you create has an endpoint, and you can use that endpoint to deploy your web application into it. Once that web application is deployed, then it is publicly available to the users. It is your responsibility to secure it by adding the identities of the users or the roles that who can play with that. So you are responsible for implement the security. But if you're not implementing the security, it means that it is publicly available. So a user will hit that URL and it will automatically load the application that is deployed in that. You can configure the settings like load balancing, scaling, right? Automatic scaling, manual scaling on that. Because whenever you create an app service, it is a resource provided by Azure. So Azure starts monitoring that service and it maintains the logs of it. It maintains the log files, that is a text information, as well as metrics database, where it will store the numerical values into it, like number of requests, number of failures, number of successful calls, and so on. So you can basically go with the scaling option that is automatic, where you will specify the condition based on the log or the matrix, that if this condition is met, if your number of requests is greater than 300, then I want to increase the count of this app service by 1, means I want another instance of it. And when this number of requests is less than 300, then I want to decrease the count by 1. So Azure is responsible for managing that infrastructure for you. You are not responsible for anything, right? You can focus on your development. That is something that this slide is talking about. Web app, it is a scalable hosting for web applications. Provide a quick way to host your web application in the cloud. Allows you to scale your web app without being required to redesign for scalability. Means there is no special thing that you have to consider for scalability. You just go to the web app, means app service, and configure the scaling option to automatic and use the matrix and the logs information to decide that at what is the criteria for scaling up or scaling down. Means they're talking about horizontal scaling, creating another instance with the same configuration, which is load balanced, right, automatically. Visual Studio integration means you can create a web application in Visual Studio, and from there you can directly deploy it on Azure in existing app service or creating a new app service for it. It is not only for Visual Studio, you can create an app service for applications created on other platforms and other languages. So these are some advantages. Near instant deployment, you can configure the secure socket layer. If depending on what type of tier you're using, you can have a custom domain names, right? Like otherwise it will use the Azure website.net, but you can define your own domain name where your app will reside. You can work with the web jobs. Each web job is basically a logic that you want to perform on a schedule or based on the triggers, which is associated with the web app where your job is running. So whenever you are creating the scalability, you can define the minimum instances and maximum instances that you want. Because if you have specified the rule that after every 300 requests, I want to have another instance. So what if 1,000 users or 10,000 users send a request? Means multiple instances are there. So you have to pay for those instances. But you don't have enough money. So you can set a limit that I want only maximum 3 instances or minimum 1 instance. So that is something that you can configure. So that's what we talked about, right? Multiple language framework, DevOps optimized. DevOps means you know that whenever you are creating a software, so it works in phases. It works with the developers team and the operational team. Developers will develop the functionality and hand over that functionality to the operation team, and operation team will configure the infrastructure and then deploy that. But sometimes there is a gap between the communication gap. So it may not work efficiently. As well as if new version comes, then you have to give it to the operation team and they have to think about how it has to be merged. So DevOps is basically a concept where you automate your content, whole process, right? So you can have a repository where like a GitHub, right, where you can deploy the source code, and then your services are there which read the data from there, test it, and then they create an infrastructure for it and then manage it. So you can configure the whole pipeline for that. So we have a DevOps team who is managing that infrastructure. Global scale with high availability. So as I talked about the scaling options, based on if due to any reason, if there is a disaster, so how you can recover with that. Connections to SaaS platform and on-premises data, more than 50 connectors for enterprise systems. SaaS services means in the app service, basically you can use connectors to communicate with the on-premises data as well as other platforms like Facebook. If you want to connect to the Facebook, then they have connectors, which helps you to get or manipulate the information stored in it. So let's see some practical, right? And then we will come back to this slide. So here I have, first of all, I'll show you from the portal. So this is my portal, and then I will create a resource, right? I will go to the compute, right? I don't know where it is available, where to create it, what to create, right? So it is a bit difficult for me to go here to find it here. So what I can do is I can simply type, you can see that web app, right? I can click on web app, right? If you try to say app service, you can see we have an app service plan, but there is no app service. So we will click on web app. Web app. So it will filter it out. You want to use this? Yes, web app. So app service web app lets you quickly build, deploy, and scale enterprise grade web, mobile, and API app running on any platform. I say, fine, let me click create. So when I click create, I have to fill the form, right? With subscription in which resource group. So I'm choosing the resource group that I created before. The name of the instance, I say my, let's say day one site. Let's see it is available or not. Yes, it is available. Publish. You want to publish the as a code or as a Docker container? I say no, it will be available as a code, means I should have my own operating system into it. Then which type of runtime you want to have into it, means what type of application you want to run. I want to run my .NET application, .NET Core application, or .NET Framework application. Let's say .NET Framework application, I want to run it. So Windows operating system is there, where your resource need to be hosted, right? Windows service plan. So service plans basically create new service plan if you want. It will decide that what resources you want to have in that machine, right? CPU, cores, RAM. So you can define that, right? Everything will be defined in the plan. So you can create a new plan, give it a name, or use the existing plan. So the plan name and the size will decide that how much money you have to pay for it. Monitoring, you can enable the application inside. It will install the application inside package, which will monitor anything that is happening in your resource. I want monitoring, you have to pay for it, right? And then simply review and create. So it will going to create a new web app for you. And when this web app is created, we can create our web application and deploy it into this web app. So this web app is for .NET Framework, right? 4.7. So then we can see that how we can use it. So till the moment it is deployed, I will go to Visual Studio. So I click on Visual Studio. And I can click File, New Project. I will choose the web. I will choose ASP.NET Web Application with the .NET Framework. Give it a name, Demo Site. Click. You can see that. Okay, 4.65 is the latest version. No problem. Let's try that. Click OK. I want to create a MVC application. So it is creating a project for me. And this website is created. I can simply build that. So build started. I want to deploy it on Azure. So I can right click on it and you can see I have an option to publish it. When I click publish, I can say that I want to publish it on Azure Virtual Machine, IIS, FTP folder. No, I want to use app service. Select existing, right? But before that, select existing, I need to check whether I have the service available or not. So what I can do is I can simply click select existing and click publish. Now it is asking for the subscription. So it is loading the subscription resource group. So at present, it is not showing anything, means it is not there. So I just wait. I will minimize it, go to the portal. It is in a process of creating it. So once it is created, then I will click on the publish again. So just waiting for it to complete because we can't continue unless and until it gets completed. The moment it completes, I would like to tell you that even when you are clicking publish, right? When you click publish, right? You can click overview, build, publish, click start. You can create a new app service from here, right? So it is not hard and fast rule that you should have a service already available. No, you can create a new service. It will create a service first and then deploy your resources accordingly. So let's wait. Okay, so it is created. I'll go to the resource. So this is basically service which is available, right? It is just loading. This is the URL, https day1 site.azurewebsite.net. So if I deploy my website, I will use this URL to communicate with the web app. So let's try to go to the Visual Studio and click start, select existing, click publish. Now you can see that in the resource group, I have this app service. I can click OK. It is preparing the profile. Done. Then it is maintaining the connection. Publish has started. You can see at the bottom, it says that publish started. Just waiting to get it completed. Okay, succeeded. Now you can see that it opens day one site.azurewebsite.net. If everything works fine, then I can see a home page. So why it took time? Because it was deploying. So you can see that day one site.azurewebsite.net, and this is the one that I have created. So even you want, you can access it. Day one site.azurewebsite.net. This is the domain, right? That into which your site is running. Now, if I go back to my Azure portal, right? In this Azure portal, this is the URL that I was talking about. So this is the URL which you can hit to open that site. Now, if at any point of time, if you look into this, there is a section called, just give me a minute. Bear with me for a minute, please. Scale up. You can see that there is a scale up and scale out. So when we click on scale up, so you will see that scale up basically means that you want to go with a vertical scaling. In the same machine, you are adding or removing the resources, right? So you can change the resources. So if production isolated, so you can change the hardware configuration of the machine. But if you want multiple instances, so you can click on scale out. In the scale out, it is a manual. You can change it. I want 2 instances. I want 3 instances. You can configure that. But you can configure the custom auto scaling. So when you click auto scaling, so you can see here there is 2 types of information available. One is metrics and the logs. So matrix will contain the numerical values and logs will contain the textual information about what is happening in it. So you can use this information to work with the scaling, auto scaling. So in the auto scaling, you can define the rules, add rules, right? Scale based on matrix. So add rule. You can define that, okay, the criteria you can specify here that average. No, I will say that, let's say count of the resource greater than 70, right? So if you click on that CPU percentage, you can see that data in, data out. These are the basically parameters. If I say that CPU percentage count is greater than 70%, then, and it is for 10 minutes, if it remain like that, then what I want, increase count by 1. So I want to make one more instance of that machine. And then similarly, I have to add a rule for decrement it. So I will just say that if the count of CPU percentage is less than 70%, then I want to decrease count by 1. So I have defined the rules. Now, once I save this, then it means that the Azure will going to manage the instances. And when we have two instances, then load balancing is done behind the scenes. So this is something what basically they are talking about here. Security, as I talk about, if you are here, if you scroll up, you have access controls. In the access control, you can define the roles. You can add roles and the users into that role. So add role assignment. So you define the role, what role you want. Right, let's say contributor. Who is the person who belongs to that? I can add user to it and then grant permission. So it means that if I say James as a contributor, so whatever permissions we have with the contributor role will be assigned to the James. And when James log in, he can access the resources accordingly. Right. So this is something that we talked about. Visual integration, app service plans. And multiple app service plan can exist in a single resource group. Multiple apps can exist in a single app service plan. So my app service plan says that, okay, I have these resources, right? If multiple resources are using that same app service plan, so those resources are shared between them. So you can choose the same service plan or use the different app service plan accordingly. It is not possible that one resource can use more than one app service plan. Each resource is bound to use only one app service plan because the cost that the billing will be generated based on the service plan that you are using. Authentication and authorization that we talked about, right? Because when you talk about the authentication, you can decide that what type of authentication you want to use in your application. It can be window-based application, it can be SQL or form-based authentication, right? So authentic security plays a very important role when you are creating your website. You can have option to work with the third-party providers, means you can authenticate your application with the Facebook, Google, Twitter. If you are a developer, then you are much more aware about it that yes, this feature is available now. So authentication and authorization. Authentication is a process of who the user is based on the credential, what he provides, verifying it with the stored credentials. If it matches, user is authenticated. And then comes authorization. Authorization is a process of verifying whether user is allowed to access the resources which he's trying to access or not. And authorization is only checked if user is authenticated. So client request will go to the app service, where app service has a DLL called easyauth.dll, and easyauth.dll is responsible for authenticating a user, generating a token. That token will be shipped to the user for further requests. OS and runtime patching. Now, if you talk about infrastructure as a service, when you go with the virtual machines, you are responsible for all the operating system patches, upgrades, and everything. But if you're talking about the app service, means web app services, then Azure is responsible for all the patches on your behalf. you even don't know about it, that how the things are updated, right? Monthly OS patching, physical servers and guest virtual machines. So whatever virtual machines it has created, physical servers it has on which virtual machines are running. So Azure is responsible for performing that. So that's why it basically asks you if you are working in creating a resource, right, virtual machines, and if you are manually running some applications in your virtual machines, and if Azure updates the main physical server, then your applications will be shut down, your virtual machines will be shut down. So how you can overcome with that? So you have availability set for that, right? But if you're talking about web app, so Azure will automatically maintain that for you. So updating runtime, app runtime. So as I discussed that when we created a app service, we choose that, okay, I need a .NET Framework version 4.7, right? So I can say AZ web app config set .NET Framework version this resource group. So I can specify which version of the which framework basically I want to use. PHP framework, .NET Framework, Python, right? I can specify that. But if I change the total framework, right, then it may lead to a problem because whatever applications that are running it will get affected by that. So we can update the framework. Like if I'm working with .NET Framework, I can say 4.6 to 4.7, right? But if I'm working with core, so the applications that are deployed into it should be the core applications. Otherwise, they won't get executed. So these are the few things that we need to think about. Inbound and outbound IP addresses. Obviously, because when we say that I want to create app service, behind the scenes, it will create a virtual machine. And virtual machine is managed by Azure, but you are accessing it because whatever request you are sending will go to that virtual machine and then it goes to the IIS server or Apache server from where your website is loaded. So there are some inbound and outbound rules which specify that which requests are allowed, which requests coming from which IP addresses are allowed and which are not allowed. So this is something that you can work with. Each app has a single inbound IP address, regardless of scale out quantity, because all the requests will go to the inbound IP address, and then the rules will specify with the load balancer that where it has to be redirected. Inbound IP address can change. Delete the app and recreate it with a new resource group. Delete the last app in the resource group plus region combination and recreate it. Delete the existing SSL binding. If you do any of these, then the inbound IP address is changing because new resource is created on new IP address is allocated to it. We can state inbound IP, static inbound IP, we can use it, but we have to pay for that. So each app has a set number of outbound IP addresses. Outbound means when my application wants to communicate with the resources outside the network, right? So how we can set that? So we can have the rules and rules that we can configure that how it can be accessed. So each app has a set number of outbound IP addresses which it can work with, and it depends upon which type of application tier that you're working with. The set and the quantity changes as you scale your app between the tiers. So, and as I was changing the application tier, right, from free tier to standard and so in that case, number of the outbound IP addresses will change accordingly. So these are the commands to know IP addresses that is associated with your resource, right? So you can just run these commands, but in exams, I don't think so they will going to ask all these commands, but it's better to know that. So enable access to resources and other network. So it is like when we talk about the Azure says that you can define your own resources and each resource can communicate with each other if you basically put them into the same private network. But you can also configure the concept, or you can configure your environment in which resources in one network can communicate with the resource in another network. But it is administrator's job to be to be very frankly speaking, right? But yes, this option is available. So this is hybrid connection. There is a relay hybrid. So what a web app basically sends a request to the intermediator, so which is a public facing IP, and then it internally map that IP to the endpoints that are available in that network. So the web app doesn't know exactly which endpoint it is hitting. So they talk with the intermediator. As you know, you don't know about me, where I'm sitting, who am I, right? Mr. Steve knows about it, and I don't know where you people are sitting. Mr. Steve knows about it. So he is the one who acts as an intermediator. All our requests and responses are going through him. So you can just think about this diagram accordingly. So Azure Traffic Manager. So load balancer and traffic manager are two things. When we are working with the load balancers, so it means that I'm working with the same region of the resources. But if my resources are in different regions and I want to configure the load balancing concept in that, then Azure Traffic Manager plays an important role in that, right? So it is responsible for automatically route traffic away from unavailable apps, and those apps can be available in different regions. If they are in the same network, right, then we can even say that we can use load balancer. But if they are in different regions, different network, then Azure Traffic Manager can play a very important role in that. So you should know how to configure the Azure Traffic Manager, which is one of the service available into it. They won't, in the exam, they won't ask you, right, how to configure the traffic manager, but they might ask you the scenario that I have the scenario where I have app services running in different network or different regions, and I want to have a load balancing concept in it. So how to configure that? What services can be used? So you can choose Azure Traffic Manager as an option there. But kindly refer to the doc.microsoft.com to see the complete demonstration on it, because to work with it, we need to have two virtual machines, two networks, and then configure the Azure Traffic Manager for that, which takes at least 1 hour. Okay, so this is when we are using a traffic manager. So what are the criteria on which he can route the traffic, right? So based on the priority, based on the weighted performance and geographic regions. So priority, distribute user to a specific app. In case of failure, route user to backup app based on the priority scheme. So you define that what basically requests need to be sent to which app based on the priorities. Wait, if wait means number of users who are accessing your site. So if I say if 5,000 users are accessing one app, the next request comes, it will go to the second instance of that app. Performance, route users to the closest app located based on the latency. So I can say that, oh, if the request comes from the region 1, then try to route the user to the instance that is running region 1. If the request comes for that app from the region 2, so find the instance of that app in the region 2 because it is closer to it. If it is not, then find another closest region to serve the request. As I told you, that traffic manager basically helps to redirect your request, right, between the apps in the same region or even different regions. So that is what basically clear my point. Route users to specific app location based on their current location. So you can basically say that no, all the requests that come from user region 1 should be served from region 1 only. Then you can configure that rules also. Local cache. So app service local cache, because when app service says that I have some data that my application is getting it from database or from some other source, so it takes a lot of time. So what I can do is I can use the app service local cache where I can keep the data there so that all the requests can be served from there. It will be much more faster. For the first time when the request will come, it will be read directly from the main source and kept it in the local cache so that all the further requests can be served from it, which is fastest way of working with it. So user cannot write the data into it, right? Only the application, when it loads the data before serving it to the client, it will keep the data into the cache from where your application will going to read. Fine. So we have a caching concept. Cache is something which keeps your data in the memory for the fast access of the data. So for the first time, the cache is blank. So it will never get the data from the cache. It will get the data from the main source, put that into the cache and serve it to the client. And all the further requests for the same data will be served from the cache. So these are the app service environments. Kindly go through that, right? So we have seen creating a Azure App Service web app, right? We have seen the whole demonstration of it. But yes, you can also use the CLI to create your resource. AZ group create. So you are creating a resource group. You are creating app service plan. So you're creating app service plan. Then AZ web app. You are creating a now app service here. And when you're creating a web app, you can specify that in which app service plan it is using, in which group it is going, what is the name of it, right? And other settings associated with it. So this is just commands that in more depth. So they're creating a resource group. First command they're explaining it here. So for a group create. So they are creating a resource group. Create app service plan. They are creating an app service plan which belongs to a resource group. One resource group can have many app service plans. Then you create a web app. Web app is a resource which can only use one of the app service plan in that resource group where it is created. So I created a web app, name, whatever we have given it in a variable, in which resource group, the one which we have created here, and the plan is the one which we have created here, right? Web app name, right? So I've created a app with this name. So app and app service plan has the same name actually in this case. Now deploying a web app with the Azure CLI, we use Visual Studio to deploy my application directly to the Azure app service. But yes, you can do it with the CLI also. So you can see some commands that helps you to achieve that goal. So they get a reference of the GitHub repository where your application resides, which you want to deploy. Then you will say AZ web app deployment source configuration. Basically, what config you want to specify? Source. That is the name, resource group where it need to be deployed, and repository URL. And it will create a new branch that is a master, and it will going to integrate it manually there. So it is not automatically mapped with the, if you have a branching, so it will not going to merge it. You have to write another command to merge that changes. So it basically, you can think about that your resource is available, your application is available in central repository, and with this command you are deploying your application into the app service with this name into that respective resource group. And then it is just printing it onto the screen, the URL. And then when you go to that URL, you can see the web application that is published there. So creating a web app with a PowerShell, CLI and now PowerShell. So whatever you can do with the CLI, you can do with the PowerShell, you can work with the portal, you can work with the SDK. So that's something that they talk about. App services on Linux. Yes, if I'm working with the PHP, Node.js, I can work with the Java, then I can create an app service that using a Linux machine. I can Docker also. When we create an app, you can see that one thing which, if you have not focused, when we created a web app, you can see that there were two options here. So code and Docker container, right? So you can create a Docker container, right? Which will create a virtual machine as soon as the application need to be executed, right? And you can run and stop the Docker container whenever you want. It is a lightweight version, but code is a full managed virtual machine. So you have two options when you're working with it. Fine. So this is something that they talk about, Docker in app service on Linux. So you have a container, sorry, my fault. You have a container image, and container image says that I am using a Docker to work with it. I have some operating system information. These are the apps that I'm working with it. And within that with this container image, you can use to create as many containers as you want, maybe on the development environment or the production environment or on the staging environment, because this container will create a same infrastructure because it brings all the resources that it needs. So this says that I need this operating system, I need this application, I need this runtime, and I need everything. So it will create a container no matter where you use it. It is much more lightweight because it is just a file, small file, and you are creating a container on the fly based on that file. Continuous integration, continuous delivery is a concept that comes with the DevOps. You can just go to this, right? Docker Hub, I talk about container registry. That is a centralized private registry for hosting your images that works with the containers. Right. Web jobs, you can see that whenever we are in the app service, whatever app service we have created, this is app service we have created. Every app service says that I have another concept here called web jobs. So web job basically is a functionality, is a code that you want to execute, right, related to the app. So you can add it, you can give it a name, you can upload the code that you want to execute, and when this code need to be run, continuous or triggered. When you say triggered, right, you can specify it can be scheduled, and you can define the cron expression like every second, every minute, every year, right, every hour. You can specify that, right, when you want, or you can specify manual. So you can manually come to that job and right click on it and say run that. So when you run it, whatever code is associated with it will be executed. If you make it continuous, right, then your app service should be running. It cannot be a containerized application, because your application, if it is not running, then web job will not be able to execute. So for making your web job continuous, your app service should be continuously running. So these are some things that you need to think about. Just give me a minute. General settings, you can see that in general settings, this is my app, my web app, and in web app you can see always on feature is on. If it is off, then when I go to the web job, and I click add and I make it continuous, it will not going to work. If I want to make my job as continuous, then I have to switch on this setting in configuration that is called always on, general settings and always on, right? And as I told you in the PowerShell command, you can change the word .NET frameworks right into it. .NET, you can change it to PHP after creating it, right? Then you can deploy your applications accordingly onto that. So whatever we have seen it in PowerShell, we can also do it graphically into it. So that's what web job is all about. Whenever you talk about the file that you are uploading, it can be a script or it can be a complete application, and these are the type of extensions that can be used: executable, batch files, command, PowerShell file, bash files, PHP files, and so on. So your jobs will going to run it accordingly. So web job type, continuous or triggered. Continuous, start immediately when the web job is created, run on all instances that web app runs on. So if I scale the web app, right, if I have 2 instances, then my web job will run on all the instances. It gives me the facility of remote debugging. So I can debug the web job that I've created. If I've created a web job in .NET, so I can attach a processor and I can see what code is running line by line. Triggered, start only when schedule is met or manually. I can attach a schedule that it should run after every second, after every minute, at 10:30 every day, right? 10:30 on a specific date, or 10:30 on specific days of the week. So I can specify this schedule with the CORN rules. And it runs on a single instance where it is configured. If you have multiple instances, it will only run on the main instance. So that's how it works on it, right? How we created a web job. Web job can also be created with the .NET programming. So I have shown it to you how the web jobs are created. So what else is there? Just a second. Creating Azure App Service mobile app. We can come back to it later because it is a big topic. So we can try to cover the small topics because we have to cover as much as we can. So creating Azure App Service APIs. Now, exactly in the same way, whenever we created a web application, now we can work with the APIs. So creating API management solution and using Swagger to document an API app. Now, API management is available here as well as in the last module also. Right. So I'll give you just a small introduction about API management right now, and then we will go in depth when we talk about the last topic. So what is a web API? Yes. Web API basically is a service which we can consume it over the internet using a URL, right? I'm talking about RESTful services, right? So let's say that I have created a RESTful service. I've created a RESTful service, and this RESTful service is available on this address. Let's say server1 dot server1 slash or port number, whatever you want, 8080 slash demo. Let's say that this is my service and I have hosted it on as an app service. Now, if people want to communicate it, they can directly send a request, and then my service is responsible for handling the request, security, and everything. It is the responsibility of it. So the data that user will going to send will be accepted as it is, right? If at any point of time, let's say my 50 applications are calling this URL in their code, and if I change anything into it, let's say it is moved from server 1 to server 2, then I have to change all the client applications. I have to change the code in every application that now this URL has changed. So it is a bit tricky. So what I can do is I can make this service available behind the API gateway, API gateway. So we have API management. API management is a service which says that management service. API management service says that what I will do is I will basically define my own endpoint. I have my own endpoint, right? That is path. Let's say that http://server A port number, let's say 80 slash test. Whenever you will going to call it, I am going to map it with this service. So any user who wants to communicate with it, they are not aware about this URL, they will use this URL, and when the request will go to API management, it will see the mapping and it will pass it there. Secondly, it will define a model. It will define the model for input. So whenever the data comes, right, it can match it with the input model. If it matches, then it will forward it. Otherwise, you can write a logic to convert the data into appropriate format. So in the model, we'll define that what type of data, what type of data is expected, right, and mapped to internal service. So when the request will come, right, it will map with the model, whatever logic you have written, it will convert the data accordingly, and then it passes to that service and the method that is there. So in that service, we will define the methods, and each method will have this input model, and then it will process it. Similarly, when the response comes, right, you can define another model for output. So we can define the output model for output. So you can play with the result. So whatever result it is returning, you don't want to return the same result to the client. So you can manipulate that result here and then pass it to the client. What do you want when the request is received at the service? You can do it some logic there also. So API management says that now if this server 2 changes to server 1, you don't have to change the clients. You just have to change the mapping here. So all the clients still talk to the same server, and it will pass it to the respected service which is mapped by specifying the methods that is associated with it. So that is the crux of API management service. And API management service is available to you. So you can API management, you click on the API management, click create, which can not only just call the services, you can call functions also. So I will just click on it here. Let's say my API management. Let's see this, what it says. Special service name is already in use. Management SRV. Okay, it is there. Subscription resource group. I will use the resource group that I have created. Location. Okay, organization name. I'm using Microsoft. And then administrator email, pricing tier developers with no SLA. Okay, that's the cheapest thing because I don't need any service level agreement, but you can specify basic tier with 99.9 service level agreement, 99.9 service level agreement in standard, and so other. So you can choose the one that you are interested in, but at present, I don't have enough money at such, you can say that, right? And so what I do is developer, no SLA, so I will click create. So it will going to create my API management. Once API management is there, then I will do all the mapping. I will create a service. I will create a methods which are mapped to my services that are running behind the scenes. And user will communicate with my API management. So it is a process. We'll wait. We'll continue till the moment it works. So till the moment it processes, let's see that. Creating API management solution. Streamline the process of common tasks necessary for creating an API for external use, because I don't want to expose my endpoint of the service to the external users. So is there any way by which I can hide it? I can play with that. So API management is the service that helps you to do that. Creating a successful and useful developer portal. Securing API endpoints from anonymous or unwanted access, because in this case, I can basically authenticate a user here only, who the user is, and then I can decide based on the authentication. If they are authenticated, then I can forward that request to the respected resource. Managing existing developer access through the cache mechanism, throttling, and other policies. Now, normally